Hello and welcome to the Hero Spouse. I'm Kenda Ruth, here to answer one of your questions about marriage and midlife crisis. Today we have Flips. Flips is a male left behind and forward-moving spouse with a bomb drop of April 1st, 2021 and a date of marriage of 2003. He has a vanisher who is a high-energy replayer. He says, I've read a lot about personality disorders and so on. She went to therapy right before bomb drop, and she was supposed to have been diagnosed with BPD, borderline personality disorder. Do you mean she was supposed to have been diagnosed or she was supposedly diagnosed? And the reason I ask is my cousin went through this with his wife years and years ago now, and she left the diagnosing session early so they couldn't diagnose with what she was looking toward being diagnosed. And so was she supposed to, or was she diagnosed? You mean supposedly? Okay, if the MLCer keeps getting rescued and never deals with anything, will they never, or will they ever come out? She has so much support, and I'm assuming you mean she has support to stay in. She has enablers. But she doesn't see her kids. Would you say on most occasions detachment is just move and forget about them? No, I wouldn't. I'll go over that more later but I want to get it answered right when the question is. No, that is not detachment. Okay, hold on. Let me go on. If she doesn't do something soon, I'll feel she's missed so much of our kids in their final years of school. It will be a permanent scar on them. Yes, but it's going to be a permanent scar on them no matter what. If she came back today, it's still going to be a permanent scar on them. This has been going on for 2 years, 2.5 years now. It's a permanent scar. Can we do things to make amends for that scar and to heal it? Yes, but it's still there. That's one of the hard things about this, is that no matter what, the kids are going to be damaged and harmed. They're going to get hurt. And we can't shelter them from life, but it would be nice if we could reduce trauma, especially in formative years. Okay. BPD is not nice at all, but I do wonder if it was just midlife crisis. Yeah, there's something to that also. Although she has had many of the symptoms, the therapy was a huge secret as well as antidepressants. Do you see some situations clearly need to be just let go? In other words, are there some situations that are where you don't advise standing? Well, yeah, and actually personality disorders is one of those. So when you determine whether I should stand or not, first, of course, if you're going to be the covenant keeping standard, that is a biblical standard. I keep my vows, and some covenant keepers are, even if I don't want to ever be with them, I will remain true to my vows. In other words, I won't marry another until the death of my spouse, that sort of thing. Most aren't that. Even strict standards, most don't go quite as strict as that. So what I look at in determining whether you should stand, I think first, it is always a good idea in the beginning, you're past that, but for everyone, to stand for your healing first. Stand so that you can become healed and more emotionally stable. Even you may have always been emotionally stable and regulated, but you just had a big shock. I want you to get through the panic and anxiety, the fight or flight period that is going through your body of this big shock before you make a major life-changing decision. And yes, I know a major life-changing decision is being made for you when they file for divorce. But before you have your say in it, you might have to go along with the motions for a divorce. But don't you want to have a say? Don't you want to have a choice? Yeah. In fact, that's one of the things that's been ripped away from us in this, is my choice was taken away. I want you to hold off on it right now. And a lot of people won't. It's okay. But I want you to focus on other things rather than I am choosing. So instead you choose to stand in, some people, I'm not sure if that's what they mean when they stand in the gap. But I stand there between the time of choosing because I'm standing for my healing. And then when you get to a place where you feel that you are more healed, not perfect, then you can make that choice. So that's just the standing for a grace period. After that, or if you choose not to do that, when should you not stand for your marriage? And a lot of these come when there is history of, but abuse. Look at the different kinds of abuse. Because there's also, we're going to tell you here, well, infidelity is abusive. Maybe it's abusive. But it's new. It's part of their crisis. And the monstering, it is emotional abuse, but there hasn't been this history. Typically, we're looking at if there has been ongoing historical abuse, especially violence. If they're violent, get out. And stay out. And understand the dangers of what you're going to go through when you get out. Get help. Those usually aren't MLC situations. But abuse. Active addiction. So we're going over the 3 A's first. Active addiction. And I say active because you can be a recovering addict. You could be a dry drunk also. And so that would be somebody who is not really drinking, but they didn't ever heal from it. And so they still have all of the underlying problems. So active addictions, or those who haven't healed from addictions, especially if they're in denial of those addictions, but those who aren't denying the addictions and like, yeah, I'm an addict, I'm going to do whatever I damn well please. I don't recommend standing. If you can have somebody who is an active addict and an intervention works and you are and they get help and agree to it, then they have moved from active to getting help and then someday to healed. So they transition. And then affairs. So most of us here have affairs. So I add that. It's serial infidelity. Often that will come with a sex abuse or some sort of an addiction. There could be an addiction to limerence. So you want to look at what's the addiction and can you work through it together that wasn't recognized as addiction in the one I said above, active addiction. Serial infidelity. Sometimes these people are just narcissists. They don't care. And they just go from person to person, and they might not be limerent objects. This just flings whoever they meet, it doesn't matter. Serial infidelity. Those are the 3 that when I was going through this and I was reading the advice in books and from other experts and articles, that were the ones you look at. I then add personality disorders to those. I put a caveat on personality disorders. If your spouse or your partner has a personality disorder, a cluster B personality disorder, I think DSM-5 may have removed borderline from cluster B. So when I was doing that, I said I include borderline in it because I had originally been looking at DSM-4. You need to understand what you're getting into, what you're dealing with, because that is a very dangerous situation in many cases as well. And they don't typically get better. It doesn't mean there isn't treatment, but to get treatment, you have to get treatment. You have to be willing and seeking treatment. You have to be willing to do the work for treatment. You have to acknowledge a problem that needs treatment. And even then, it may be something that is always an uphill battle. So personality disorders are one of those situations where I'm like, yes, stand for your healing first. So that just because you're not making a decision and you have to figure out how you're going to deal with this situation, then make your final decision and how you're going to go about it. This portion where you're standing in the grace, you can be making your plans. Let's say your spouse hasn't filed for divorce, and it's okay. I'm not filing for divorce yet. I haven't made a final decision, but I think this is where it's heading because my spouse has a personality disorder. I don't think they're ever going to improve or get better. They are in denial, and I've always been, and we have a history of this. So while I am not filing for divorce and healing, I am thinking about the steps I am going to need to take when I do file, when I do make a decision. Now, that might be writing down, or it might be boiling these ideas in your head to start with. First, you think about it. Then thought, word, and deed. Word, in this case, writing it down. Later on, you take the action. Later on, you make the decision. So the therapy was a huge, you said you do wonder if it was just MLC, although she's had many of the symptoms. So when we look at personality disorders, so in your case, borderline, how far do these go back? Was she this way as a teenager? Was she this way in her 20s? Did she meet enough of those symptoms? Or were these things, traits, these characteristics of BPD, things that arose when she was going through some form of having problems, traumas, cycling into emotional issues. And it could be things happened, external things happened. You went through a disaster and she was having trouble coping. She was having trouble getting a job, or her company got bought out and she got fired. Not fired, but laid off. Anything that might not have been her fault. Somebody died. Different traumas that affect us in our life, and we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how to handle them. And oftentimes our negative coping skills arise, especially if we're dealing with things that we weren't trained for, that we have developmental holes from childhood from. So she may have more traits. Maybe she's full borderline. Maybe she has some of them. Maybe they are just things that she can control, and we see these traits. And I think you're asking because you wonder if it's just MLC, and you may have seen that we say MLCers have these traits. It doesn't mean that's what they are. It doesn't mean an MLCer is a borderline personality or is a narcissistic personality. It means they are that way during midlife crisis, which means they are not diagnosable as that for DSM, just based on that, based on this period of life, because the personality disorders are based on the entire lifespan, from the entire young adult or adult lifespan. So teenage years through present times. She would need to meet, usually it's 5 of the 9 criteria through that whole period. And so is this something that is just arising in midlife crisis? You've said that she already has many of the symptoms, so maybe she's a borderline. I can't tell you that, but that could be. It could be maybe looking back, you're saying, well, yeah, sometimes I noticed this with her. But what was the context of that thing where sometimes you noticed whatever it was, whatever symptom with her? Was it something else? Was there a comorbidity? Such as, let's say she was depressed and she had trauma from childhood and she was having suicidal ideation. Well, there's a symptom. But it's a symptom of so many other things. So was the symptoms you were seeing, were those symptoms explainable with other contexts that she was going through? Look at that. Because I can't tell you. But I can tell you that somebody who goes to, at midlife, who is let's just say, a midlife borderline or a midlife narcissist, and they go for a diagnosis, they at that time may have 5 of the 9, but they may not have that crucial one of the longevity of it, and they still may come away with a diagnosis. And it's not fair or right, because it's not permanent for them. If they can overcome it, at least how we understand it now, then they aren't it. They have tendencies. They are at risk for going into that. But if they have ever had the ability, for instance, to have empathy at higher levels, not just they can read someone's emotions, but that they can have compassion as well. That's not a narcissist. That's not a borderline. Personality disorders do not have the capacity for higher level empathy. They have the capacity to be able to manipulate you because they can read your emotions. They know that person is feeling vulnerable. That person is feeling sad, happy, mad, and I can manipulate that. So they can read the room, but they can't feel the room. They don't share the pain of the room. They don't have the compassion for the room. So if she was able to empathize, she's not really a borderline. Yeah, maybe she is. And we can mimic empathy and be fooled as well, especially when we have limerence for the person, or there's just some form of romantic love, even if it's not at the high energy fireworks pathological level that limerence might be. So let's go back to your question about detachment. Would you say on most occasions detachment is just move and forget about them? No. I understand what you're saying is, do we just cut our losses? Yeah. Although you have children with her, you need to have a relationship with her. Co-parenting. She will be in your life for the rest of your life, or I hope she will be for your children's sake. That may be reduced significantly when they're adults. My parents divorced when I say 4, but by the time I was 4 in the summer, he was already out of the house because he was never. So I'm thinking maybe they split up when I was 3. I was so young. I don't remember parents together. And my dad and mom co-parented. They did a good job. And my dad had me on weekends. And then I grew up. And they didn't live anywhere near each other. My dad drove hours because I had a brother. I have a half brother, and he lived the other direction. So my dad drove an hour to see me. Then he'd drive an hour, or get my brother first, which was 1 hour in one direction. Then he'd drive the 2 hours to my place, and then an hour back after being a bus driver all day. So he did a lot of driving, and he was dedicated. But my parents weren't near each other. So when I was an adult, yeah, they didn't see each other. My mom did house sit for he and my stepmom. At one point, I was so impressed and so proud and excited because that's my parents and they were getting along. But when my dad went to my grandma's funeral, my mother's mother, my mom almost didn't recognize him because he had aged so much, and my 6'4" father it wasn't that he was shorter, it was that he was bent over. He no longer could stand up straight because his health wasn't good. So they hadn't had contact, and they didn't call each other up and chat on the phone. I think they may have talked occasionally. I don't know if it was once a year or less. When I was going through Chuck's midlife crisis, I told my dad, not my mom, and my dad then told my mom. And so I would call my dad, and then my dad would, after we hung up, my dad would call my mom. And so they were in a lot of contact at the beginning and there. So they co-parented. What that means, though, is when it came to me, I was the hinge that kept them together. And when I didn't need them together as parents, so when I wasn't in a midlife crisis, they didn't need to be doing that. But as soon as I did have a need, they were there. They were in contact with each other, and they always knew how to get into contact with each other. And I don't think they avoided it. But other than that, you've got the weddings and funerals. And I think my grandma's funeral was the last time my mom saw my dad. You're always going to have that kind of contact, I hope, for your children's sake. My parents did a great job. So it's not move on and forget about them in that way. And then detachment there are a lot of different pieces to detachment. I'm sorry, this is a long one, but I want you to understand detachment. It is not about forgetting. It is not just moving on. Although detachment facilitates your being able to move forward, it is healing, and it is there's forgiveness involved because there is a release of emotional energy, but it is about not being attached, obviously. But what does that mean? When you are attached to another person, you often feel that your emotions may be connected. Sometimes it's just, I can sense this person. There's an intuitive link. But sometimes it's, oh no, what am I going to do? They're going to be angry. And then you feel you have to respond, react. You go out of your way to do things that avoid these things. Or they are angry and you feel yourself go out angry with them. Think about a fire. Your house is on fire. And you need to get your scared children out. How good is it going to work if you panic? Panic is sudden, unreasoning fear where one loses the ability to help oneself and others. Okay, so that just answered it. It's not going to work if you panic because you lose the ability to help yourself and others. If you are letting your emotions ride with the other person's emotions, you're losing the ability. You're losing the ability to help yourself if that person goes into a state of, say, panic, say, anger. Anger can be a point where you might not feel the same as panic, but you go into rage and you lose control. Rage is anger at a level where you have lost control of it. What about depression? Depression may be a melancholy or sadness at a point where you've lost control of it. ride the emotion. So that is the entanglement piece that often comes with detachment. You are emotionally entangled, sometimes to the point that you don't know where you are and where they are because you're so knitted together. So you know which fingers are which. But instead, take wires and put your cables that you always, those cords you throw in one box and they get all messed up. How can you tell which one goes with which? You have to really carefully, sometimes it takes a few minutes, sometimes a few hours to pull them apart. So think about cords. And then sometimes when you pull on one, you make a tighter knot. So it gets even tighter. That's entanglement or enmeshment. And sometimes when you are entangled or enmeshed, you do not know where you start and the other person begins. So you're getting mixed up with their feelings, thinking that their feelings are your feelings. I am so angry. Wait a second, what am I angry about? Wait a second. And yeah, your body does all the anger things. When you detach their anger, you are able to stay emotionally stable. So I am going to put in the comments below a link to James Messina's article about detachment, because there's so much more than entanglement and that enmeshment and the emotional piece. But that is one of the biggest pieces that's easiest to explain. But this is the best article I have ever seen on it. This is the article that I looked at when I was at Divorce Busting. We passed it around everywhere. And it's not prose. It is basically several bulleted lists. And just lists. What are the benefits? What are the detriments? One of the lists is steps. And one of the list steps has a step within steps, so they're nested even. It's just huge. And it is one of the things I would like it if everybody would go and not just read it, but study this to understand detachment, because there are so many pieces and so many facets of it. And detachment, to me, is the most important tool in your healing toolbox. It's not just about, I'm going to forget about them. I'm going to cut the cord. We may use the metaphor cut the cord for letting go, which is a high level. There's attached, holding on. Once fetus is attached, once you cut that cord, then you grab on and then you let go. But those are just metaphors. I want you to understand the actions that go with it, the benefits that come with it, and the detriments that come with not doing it, the consequences of not detaching, what it can do to you, the codependency that goes with it. Okay? So let me look and see, make sure I've gotten everything in here. If the MLCer keeps getting rescued and never deals with anything, will they ever come out? I think that's a really good question. If an MLCer allows herself to always be rescued, if they have a pattern, this is more likely then if she has a pattern of codependency already, if she has allowed herself to be that, if she has never allowed herself to rescue herself and be the empowered person, has she always tried to be a victim or get rescued and never solve her own problems? The other thing to look up, and I will try, I'll just see if I reference it in the comments, is look up the Karpman drama triangle. And the reason I reference it in the comments is it's not because there aren't articles, but there are so many. When I do it, I just usually go Karpman drama triangle or drama triangle. And I just go to Google Images, and they have all sorts of diagrams where you can read about it. You can also go to YouTube and get some videos on it. But she's on the drama triangle. If you're on the drama triangle, you're codependent. If you're codependent, you're on the drama triangle. That's how I see it, at least. And she is in a rescuer role, or a victim role. There's a few roles on that. There's 3 roles, and you typically cycle between these roles. There's persecutor, rescuer, and victim, if I'm thinking of it right. But everyone typically has their own where they spend most of their time. And if she is getting herself rescued and keeps getting rescued and you're right. Why deal with anything? The difference is if she has dealt with things before. But if this has been enough of a pattern, then yeah, I can't guarantee she'll come out. I just can't. So I don't feel, I hope the information is helpful, because I feel like I'm not giving good news, but I want it to be informative. And I want you to go in this with your eyes wide open, understanding that if this is BPD, what that might mean, and that you are asking the right questions. If they keep enabling, why stop letting them enable? So I still hope it was helpful, and I will see everybody in the next question.